Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Monica Gathuo, and you are tuning into In Conversations with the Finnish Institutes. And today's institute hosting us is the Finnish Institute in Berlin. I'm going to introduce our guests, and then they'll have a few minutes time to just tell a little bit about themselves and their work a little bit more. We're going to spend around 45 minutes discussing, and then we will have a good 15 to 10 minutes in the end to ask some questions from our guests. So please do send questions in the comment section so that you get to get some more information about something that might interest you. Okay. So first of all, I want to say a big thank you to Mikko Fritze and the Finnish Institute in Berlin, who is hosting or who are hosting, and we have also some of your staff here. Mikko, would you care to tell a little bit about the Institute, its work, and a little bit about yourself?
Yes, hello. Nice to see you all here. We host this together with other Finnish institutes in the world. There are 17, and we are the one in the German-speaking countries. It might be misleading that it says Berlin, but we are taking care or doing work in Germany, Switzerland, and Austria, maybe a little bit in Liechtenstein and Luxembourg and all these other German-speaking parts as well. And our job kind of is to make a cultural exchange between Finland and these countries. And this is a very interesting theme in this field, I guess. And yes, my name is Mikko. My surname is Fritze. There are as well kind of both parts of me represented. I was born and brought up partly in Finland. I lived there as an adult for quite a while. Mä puhun jonkun verran suomea vielä, kyllä siitä jotain suuhun jäi. And my surname is not a typical German name, but as a surname, as a name it is, but it's very German. And I'm German, actually, and since a little bit more than half a year, heading the Finnish Institute in the German-speaking countries. I'm looking forward to this discussion and talk.
Thank you so much. We have also Eeva-Kristiina Nylander. You are now Nylander. It says Eeva-Kristiina Nylander in our event, but it needs to be changed, Nylander. And we also have Elisabeth Tietmeyer. Eva-Kristiina Nylander is an archaeologist from the University of Helsinki and an osteoarchaeologist from the University of Stockholm. She has worked with themes such as the Sami cultural heritage, research ethics, and repatriation questions together with the Sami Society for a long time. Currently, she works with the new permanent exhibition for Sámi Museum Siida, and she also was a member of the working group of the joint repatriation exhibition between Siida and the National Museum of Finland called Homecoming, right?
Yes. Yes, right. Thank you.
Do you want to say something, a few words about yourself or the work that you're doing, or where you are at the moment and what's happening?
Yes, well, I am at the moment in Venice, and sorry if you hear something from the background. They are my friends getting prepared to go to the gala dinner. We have had today the opening of the first ever Sami pavilion here in Venice Biennale, and it has been a great event. And obviously for me, as I work with the Sami heritage and with repatriation and exhibitions, so this is a very great moment where the Sami culture is kind of, receiving more platform in the global world through art, like kind of in its own terms.
Yes, and it's I can't wait to come and see it. I'm really excited to see it. Then we have Elisabeth Tietmeyer, who is the director of the Museum of European Cultures and National Museums in Berlin. I'm not going to pronounce the German name, but maybe Elisabeth will be doing that a little bit later. Her museum's activities and research focus on the topics like diversity, forced migration, cultural entanglements, gender, and immaterial and material culture. Elisabeth, would you care to, oh, I remember you have some pictures to show us and something more to also elaborate.
Thank you very much, Monica. I'm very happy that I'm here, that you invited me for this discussion. And I really would like to to show you some pictures of our museum and what we are doing and why I am here in this discussion. So I will share now. Please, the host, can you deactivate the share button?
Yes. Olivia?
I'll check on the host.
Yes.
I can go through the
No, it should be fine.
Yes, should be fine.
Okay.
Okay.
I see.
Yes.
Yes.
So, okay, well, very brief introduction. Well, our museum is located at the edge of Berlin, in the southwestern part of Berlin. We host around 280,000 objects from the 18th century up to today. And we are mainly concerned with everyday culture and with the living environments in Europe, and with the main focus on Germany, because one of our predecessor institutions has been the Museum of German Folklore. And it belongs to our profile to address the topic of cultural entanglements and with Europe, and we focus on current questions as to forms and consequences of cultural diversity. And as a consequence, of course, we have to include the characteristic views of the correspondent people. And this requires, of course, participatory work. And here I come to the Sami collection. We have about 1,670 objects, included 650 photographs concerning Sami culture. And they come from the 18th century up to today. And they are objects of everyday life, sacred and spiritual, Georgi artworks. But we don't store human remains. And in our central archive, there are very many documents about the acquisition of many objects. And this is very important for further research. And so it's still now deactivated. Oh, no, here we are. I'm sorry for that.
No worries.
And many of the objects have been acquired at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th. And this was the phase of the foundation of so-called ethnological museums and the high phase of colonialism in Europe. And among these artworks or spiritual objects are Shaman Drums. And the left one you see is one of the most valuable, oldest artifact. And it was collected collected for the Royal Prussian Art Chamber in the beginning of the 18th century. And this was collected in a colonial context during the forced Christianization of the Sami in the 17th century in Sweden. And the second drum you see on the right, we don't know exactly what it is. It may be a copy of an etching of the 17th century, but it was also part of the Royal Prussian Art Chamber, and there still research is done. And another example of forced Christianization and colonialism is the fact that our house has so-called horn hats. And thanks to the collaborative work with researcher and curator Eeva-Kristiina Nylander and artist Outi Piski, we know a little bit more about the fate of the objects. And the collaboration with them took place in 2018-19, and their research led to the artistic performance and exhibition with historic horn hats of the MEC in the Berlin Max Liebermann House. But collaborative research is required for all objects and artworks of the Sami people. And another example for collaboration was in November last year, the German Goethe Institute in Helsinki organized and financed a residency program on Sami topics, and the research was conducted by a Germany-based Japanese researcher Fumi Takanayagi and Sami researcher Aile Aikyo, who spent 2 weeks in Sápmi, amongst others with the Siida Museum, and 2 weeks in Germany visiting museums with Sami collections, amongst others, the MEC. Now, what do we want to do? Of course, we want to continue this collaborative research. We applied for financing a 2-year provenance research project at the German Lost Art Foundation, and 2 weeks ago it has been approved. And now we are very happy to discuss the collaboration process more intensively. And we plan this as a tandem research in Berlin and in Sápmi, and it will combine archival research with the oral history of the communities that produced and used the objects. And also, of course, with object studies investigating Sami handicrafts as an indigenous knowledge system. Then our aim is a multilingual presentation. At first, the results of the provenance research will be recorded in the database in at least 2 languages, German and English. And here we are already collaborating with a Norwegian Sami project group called Sami Collections in German Museums. And the long-term goal is to determine the Sami expressions for all objects, of course. And further, of course, we would like to develop a joint exhibition presenting the research results and traveling elsewhere in Germany and, of course, in the northern countries. And then, what about the future of the collection? We can't say, of course, now, but now, according to German law, the Sami collection belongs to the German state. But from a moral and ethical point of view, they belong to the Sami people. And let's see how we proceed. But I'm sure that we are very, very open to discuss what to do with the collection. And this was my very small introduction to our Sami collection and what we are doing and planning. Thank you.
There we go. Thank you so much. So, as maybe some of you who have already introduced yourself to the theme of tonight or this evening. Night is a bit of a stretch to say because it's still very, very, very light in Finland. And I guess looking up from Mikko's window is also very light in Germany. But this evening we will be discussing the theme of returning home, repatriation, and how we can think of the stories and the narratives behind these cultural artifacts, but also our own narratives of our identities. And we'll be tonight focusing on Sami and the Sami cultural heritage, which is not very known, and it's now gaining some momentum, but also like some recognition, because this has been really lacking from the history. I would like to start with a question of just something that I was very personally interested in, and then we had a really great discussion over. Why does the repatriation process take so long? Like you were discussing already, Elisabeth, a little bit about who owns things and what happens, but what really happens? Why does it take so long? Also, I know that you, Eeva-Kristiina, you have been part of the process in Finland, but now, please, could you elaborate a little bit? What is it that takes time?
Well, I think if we think about the collections, it of course depends a little bit on which country we are in. But for example, if we think about the collections in the European continent, for example, in Berlin, we come to the situation that we have collections from a very large area, from South Sami area to the Kola Peninsula to the Kildin Sami area and to the Russian Sami area. So at first, what you have to do is you have to figure out where do these objects come from. And obviously, in an ideal case, you would have very good museum diaries. But it is very often that ethnographic collections or so-called ethnographic collections in the museums, they lack the provenance information. They lack information about the seller, the circumstances where the objects were purchased, but also occasionally the location. So you need to kind of look maybe deeper into archives, and also it helps if you know the Sami material culture. But this can actually take quite a long time, and it's not in each cases it's not very easy. And then we, for example, have the situation in relating to the Skolt Sami people, who after the Second World War were forced to. They went to 2 times during the war times. They went to. They were evacuated from their home area, which was partly in the Russian side of the border. And then when the Second World War or the Lapland War ended, then they never got to return from the third evacuation trip. So there's a huge amount of collections in European and Nordic museums that come actually from the Russian side of border, but the inheritance of these materials currently live in the Finnish side of the border or in Norwegian side of the border, and only a small minority in Russian side of the border. So there is a lot of things that has to be studied in order to know where to situate them, because we in Finland and in Sweden have only one Sami museum, but for example in Norway there are 9 Sami museums, and they all kind of have their own field in a certain geographical and cultural area. So you understand that then the work becomes quite difficult to do, or it's not difficult, but it's time consuming, to say it so.
Yeah. Yes, go ahead. Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. And it's even more complicated, more complex, as Eva-Kristiina told us now, because the researcher or the researchers have to know the German language. They have to know the different typewritings. This a very special German typing. Not everybody knows it. This is very, very complicated. And this man or this woman has to know at the same time about the Sami collection and the Sami culture, of course. And so you have to have an historian, you have to have perhaps an anthropologist or a musician, depends on what you are looking for. And another way would also be to invite the handicraft experts of the Sami people, the Duodja, and they have another view on objects, and they have another knowledge system, and so perhaps we can combine it. And this is what we're planning. We combine this historical research with the research of the Duodja to create new knowledges, and to create a huge archive of knowledges. And this would be ideal. If this works, I don't know, but this would be ideal. And this really takes a long time. Imagine about 400 objects we have. We don't know anything, 400.
Yeah.
And the other information is very little. Yeah.
Also knowing the words in Sami, but then having a translation for it. So also the question about language, and which language is this knowledge also produced and translated and then retranslated, or can we find our original spot? I think that's also really interesting. And what we were also touching, that language and the narratives and the story, like where can we have all this knowledge and data? So that, very interesting.
Yes, you can kind of say that we have, or there has been a kind of colonial collection has been created, or a common kind of heritage that we have to kind of go back, and we have to try to dismantle the structure of it. And like Elisabeth said, in the example of Berlin, there can be German, Swedish, Finnish, and even North Sami that is used in the collections, the museum diaries. So it's kind of it creates challenges to the persons who study them, and also it's of course studying archive material is not for everyone. Not everyone likes it.
No.
So it's challenging, but not impossible.
Yeah, Mikko, please. Yes.
Yeah, I have a question, and then I think it was Eeva-Kristiina, I think it was one of your lectures I saw on the internet where you were telling that you found some information about these, we talked about them, horn hats, through a diary of one of those guys who brought it into, I think, Helsinki. I don't remember exactly. And actually you were looking for facts and documentation, and then you read the diary and then you saw that he was only 2 days somewhere and in that family. And so you kind of guessed that through this diary remark, it must have been in that place and in that family where the hat's coming from. So, I mean, it goes very far how to get information about these objects. And yes, but my question would be to T Meyer, how is it now? If I understood that you got some money, and what would be, for example, one approach you to choose to now? What would be one of the first things you would try to do with your collection to find objects or identify their origin, or what's what you're going to do next? I think that's super interesting, because now it seems everything almost impossible, but now you have the money and now you will approach the thing, I guess.
An excellent question. Yes.
Yeah, well, the first step will be definitely to get in contact, to meet with our colleagues of the Sámi museums, and Eva-Kristiina will be there too, of course. And so we are in contact to the representatives of the Sámi museums in Norway, in Sweden, and in Finland, and also to the project group Sámi Collections in German Museums, which has been created a year ago by the Sámi Parliament in Norway. So we meet, and then we all discuss what will be next. And of course, we have the money, and we want, of course, to hire a colleague who is capable to do the research, the provenance research, really to do historical work. Yeah, this is very important. But also, we have now to develop the project plan, how we go on, how we do the tandem work. So via workshops, and that Dvořák come to Berlin, and that we go to the Sámi museums. So it's really an exchange that we will do. And so little by little, we really develop now how we will proceed. But first of all, we have to do the project plan, and then we have to make a call, to publish a call for hiring a person who is capable to read the files and to know that this person should know very much about Sámi culture, of course. We cannot do it. This is the next step.
Talking about next steps, I feel like that a lot of when we are looking at especially repatriation, we're also talking about politics. Like we already brought up money. Money is part of the politics.
Okay.
I'm just wondering, like, is it always political? Like, is repatriation political? And can we also gaze it in a critical way of like, what is the role of repatriation? Do we need to always return things? How do we navigate that? Does it need to be like a concrete giving it back, or can it be, something that a process of clarifying the object and its history and its narratives? Can we discuss a little bit about that?
Well, I think that everything in cultural heritage field is political. I think I have colleagues, archaeologists, who say that I don't want to do politics, but I mean, if you excavate the ground that contains the remains of the people that were here on this planet before us, then I think it's very highly political. And all the cultural heritage fields have been created for political reasons, for creating a nation.
Yes.
And also museums are very political. So I think that's something we don't have to be afraid of. We can be open and say, yes, it's political, but we can also think about the other meanings that repatriation has. It's political, it is very important for Sami self-determination, but it's also, these objects situated in different museums and institutions are the historical archive and the whole archive of Sami culture. It's kind of like a whole language that has been written in these objects. I mean, the stitches, the ways you have decorated the objects, the way you have done it, it tells so much to the people who can learn or who can read the language of Tuotji, that is Sami crafts. So in that sense, it is very, very important to the Sami people. But during my research that I have done together with Sami communities in Finland and in Norway, I really have gotten the clear idea that people feel that they come into connection with their ancestors. So there is this deep like spiritual, but also deep emotional relationship with these objects. So I think when we see the importance, and we all can relate to emotions, if we are not psychopaths, then we can relate, and in that sense it becomes like understandable that maybe these objects, okay, they can look nice in vitrines in different places, but if you think about the meanings they can have in Sápmi, in the Sami land, then the meaning becomes a bit more maybe deeper, I think. And I don't know, I cannot say if everything should be returned. That's something that the Sami parliaments and the Sami council must take, they must tell how they feel, how the Sami elected organs, they must say how it will be. But I think it's a very good idea to think about, would it be possible to give the ownership to the Sami people and give the possibility for them to curate the exhibitions and the way to guide how to store it. If something is to remain in other museums, then maybe do it in a way that would be would kind of say that, okay, these are your objects, these are your heritage, it's your right to govern them. If we want to show them, let us show them in a way that is through your cultural eyeglasses, so that it can be kind of, the Sami people can kind of give their signature. This is fine. This is how I want my culture to be presented.
Go ahead.
I just
maybe.
I'm curious, because you're kind of touching a theme I have a question about. For example, concretely, the collection from the National Museum in Helsinki. Was it all brought to Siida? Was it all brought up north, or is there already a solution that some stuff stays in Helsinki, is stored there, but the ownership is in Lapland or Sápmi? How is it? Because I can imagine if you get all back now, there's a logistical problem, maybe.
I think Elisabeth also might have like a good.
Sorry, yes, sorry.
Yeah, but good question, Mikko. Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Well, of course, museums are political, especially our museum, because we are a museum for and of society, and we work for the society, because society pays us. Yeah, and that is why we are political. And of course, the repatriation process is always political. And in Germany, for example, there are, of course, negotiations between the state authorities for cultures and the local authorities of another state, for example. And there you see that it is really political. But it's always also a question of ownership. May I give you an example? The German state returned or restituted objects to Namibia, the former German colony. And the counterpart of the German state was the Namibian state. But this state did not involve the Herero and Nama, who were very much involved, of course, in the looting of objects. And they didn't have any representatives there. And so there was a conflict on that side. You see, this is, I want to say how important the ownership is. And from our side, we would never make an exhibition on Sami culture of our own. No, we won't dare this because we don't know it. The experts are in Sápmi and not elsewhere. And of course, we would like to still store some objects in our collection, of course. And then we are, for example, planning to redesign our collection presentation, our permanent exhibition. And there, of course, we want to historicize our collection, and then the Sami part plays a huge role there. So this would be also important for us to keep some objects at least.
Yes, and I mean, I think that the situation in Museum of European Cultures is really good. I mean, you have always taken also the Sami people and interested people to visit your collections, and that's not self-given. It can sometimes be very, very difficult to get into museum collections, even though when you are a professional, not to mention if you are, for example, just an ordinary person who is interested about his or her roots. But the repatriation between the National Museum of Finland and Siida, it went in a way that the National Museum kind of thought that, okay, it will strengthen the self-determination of the Sami people if we give everything back. But there has been a cooperation agreement that was signed, and this agreement guarantees that the National Museum has the possibility to loan these objects from the Sámi Museum Siida, and I think it's without expenses, so that they will, of course, maybe or probably pay for the transit costs, but no official loan agreement, or they don't have to exchange money. And at the moment, they already have some Sami objects in the new basic exhibition they have about the Finnish history, which is called Toista maata. Now I cannot translate it.
Other land or from another land.
Yes.
Or,
yes. And in the future, they will loan probably more objects from the museum. So they want to, and then also Siida will give the expertise and help to put it, to represent the culture in a way that is acceptable. And then in addition, all the other objects, but not the objects presented in Homecoming exhibition, have already returned to Inari. And the majority of the objects that will be visible in our new exhibition, permanent exhibition, are from this repatriated collection. So it's highly important for the Sámi Museum. And so we have this Homecoming exhibition that we are planning to take to a tourney. So if there are interested people in the audience, just take contact to the National Museum of Finland or to Sámi Museum Siida. if you want to have this wonderful exhibition visible in your own museum.
Maybe the Finnish Institutes can. What is the role? How can are these things that also the institutes can engage with?
Of course, I mean that's not everybody from the German museum field or German-speaking museum field is now in this meeting, and we are there to keep this idea valid and vivid. So that's one of our jobs, and definitely we will be talking to other players in the field and keep this Sami thing alive.
Yes. So I think it's, I'm really looking forward what will happen in Berlin, because there's now, and in Germany, because there's now so much, I mean, cooperation ongoing, and it will be really nice to see what happens. And I appreciate, because Sami museum world is not a very large branch. And at least in Finland, we are not too many, and there's not enough people working in the field. And you know, like in all the other cultural fields, there is no money. So I appreciate it very much that the Museum of European Cultures has made the initiation to apply for financiation and give the possibility to kind of to study the collections they have, and who knows what will happen afterwards. I'm sure it will be a very positive thing for everyone.
Yes, I agree. So you see, when you know our storage, Eva-Kristiina and other people also, but when you look at the objects, and I was asking myself, what are they doing there? There are so many, and never were they shown or presented in an exhibition. There was one exhibition in the 70s, for example, but only few objects were shown. So I think the objects should go there where they are most beneficent. And this is Sápmi. Yeah. And I'm also very happy that we will cooperate, and well, the initiative, one of the initiatives was also taken by this project group in Norway, the Sami collections in Germany, and they are very active, and we cooperate with them well for a few months now, and this cooperation is very, very vivid. So I'm very thankful for that. And then we also cooperate with Siida, and now we must combine every activity, surrounding us, and so we will come together. And this is very complicated to connect all these activities. But it's exciting. Yeah.
Just a note before we continue a little bit, we have still a couple of minutes, that if you have any questions, please send us some questions, and we'll get back to them in a few minutes. But don't hesitate to ask, because we have such a broad knowledge and such wonderful professionals here to kind of also broaden your pictures, but also like we can expand and we can discuss more. Did someone want to continue from here? I just had one question that I was like really interested about. I'm just interested, how can a regular citizen like take part of a repatriation process? Because like Eeva-Kristiina, you said, like not everyone is allowed in these spaces of knowledge. And then if it's about your own roots, how can someone who doesn't have the keys to the institution, how can they be part of or engage with the repatriation process?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and obviously the repatriation processes that have been ongoing in Finland until now have been very much, they have been done kind of behind closed doors. I mean that they have been negotiated between museums, and that's one way to do it. And but obviously then it just comes as a surprise. Okay, now they repatriated, fantastic. But I think that by, for example, now that we have the Sámi Museum Siida, and they have now over 10,000 objects there, so it's the largest collection in Finland. Then it's maybe possible to visit there, and for the Sámi people, there's going to be many workshops that will be held. Yeah. There is going to be a kind of social space for this kind of work, where the Sámi crafters and also other interested people can come and gather and study the objects and be with them and have discussions in their own language between themselves. And so in that way, and how can you otherwise take part in it? Well, you can read and maybe, well, we still have some museums in Finland and abroad that have Sámi collections that are never exhibited. And somehow also they are not very meaningful. I mean, if some museum has maybe 150 objects, is it very meaningful to have them? Or could they maybe be more meaningful in the Sámi context? And of course, we have museums abroad, like the largest owner of Sámi collections outside Sápmi is in Stockholm, the Nordiska Museet. And it's a foundation, so it's not state-owned, which makes the situation very interesting because they have very, very old objects. Mm-hmm. They have a lot of sacred drums. Mm-hmm. And also the fact that they have the oldest objects coming from the area that is nowadays Finnish side of Sápmi, Enontekiö area. So I think that there is a lot of heritage that is still, if I look through the eyes of Finland's situation, that is still like very much needed in our like Sámi Museum. And there, for example, the Nordiska Museet is very important. So I don't know, generally being activist and acknowledging things and maybe reading and, well, yeah.
But wouldn't it be also a possibility to have, first of all, an online collection? You put it online and very simple to handle, so that people at least have, well, at the first step, the possibility to look at the objects and to read what is written about, and to have a commentary or a function for commenting the information. And this would help a lot, I think. I can imagine. Well, we don't have it because we are very, very traditional, but we don't have this comment function, and I really miss it. Because this is also kind of citizen science. If the people see what it's all about, and then, oh no, this I know different stories, and so I have to put this into the comment function. So this would be good.
Yes, but it's kind of a sword with two blades, and this is it's a very difficult thing for me. For example, who I have worked 16 years ago, I started to work in a project that really had the mission to put as many as possible objects from the Nordic museum collections, Sámi collections, online. Yeah. And we thought that this would be really good. And it was to a certain extent. But then it was realized that it's possible that these objects, when they are online, they are kind of very easy target for people who want to appropriate Sámi culture. So that's a very, very difficult question. On the other hand, I mean, for example, MEC and Nordiska, they have fantastic web pages. You can go in and look at the objects. Yeah, but then again, there is always this, the possibility of appropriation, and this is something that is certainly has been discussed, for example, in Finland, in the Sámi Museum very much, in Sámi archives, but also in this working group who works towards to have ethical guidelines in Sami research in Finland. So I think this is something that needs to be discussed. So internet and online collections were not the result that we were hoping for.
Mikko, you had a comment.
I think you asked what the average people can do. I think they can do a lot. Isn't it quite surprising how big the discussion has been the latest years about this theme? And I mean, going to museums, talking to friends, you should have an attitude. I hope the people get the right attitude. I think the right attitude is that the objects have to get close or even back to their origins, owners, whatever, how you call that. And everybody of us can do that. If you're in a museum, you can ask, why is it not well told? Or I don't understand, where is this stuff coming from? And kind of insisting on it or making a comment. I think that's really, really important. So that's millions of people could do that. And as you said, Eva-Kristiina, read and build your own opinion. It's a super interesting and difficult theme. And then I had this idea, because you said that Elisabeth Tietmeyer, that when I heard, I now remember it was your lecture, Eva-Kristiina, and then you were telling about that when you were doing something with Outi Pieksi, then you were talking in Sami language to the objects. And I kind of thought, yeah, it's very beautiful. It has something esoteric or whatever, and something very touchy. And I like that a lot. And I thought maybe if you do this online stuff, maybe you give a chance to people to at least talk to these objects. So maybe some Sami people from Northern Europe can at least talk a little bit into your deposits, and then the objects feel better, because you said that as well. So sad. They have been for hundreds of years or decades at least in these, where are they, shelves, and nobody touches them, talks to them, sees them. That's really sad. Yes,
because these objects, I know they were made with lots of love and with kind of very carefully designed for the purpose they were used for. And obviously, then there is a lot of emotions bound to them, but also the fact that, you know, it's very much about the material. So touching is very important. But obviously, I mean, I understand the point that pictures are better than nothing. And 15, 16 years ago, we were in the situation that we did not know. We didn't know where are the collections. We didn't know how much there is. And we started from kind of scratch. That had been, first it was Sweden who became active in the matter, and then also the other Nordic countries or the Sami museums. So we have come a long way, but still we are in the beginning. But I like the fact that, yeah, that was really, I like that very much. And yeah, I think it's very important that these pieces of if you could say love or objects or whatever, when we meet them, then we greet them in their own language, and we have together with Outi, when we give these lectures or talks in her exhibitions, for example, or when we visit places, it's important, like you said, to speak Sami, but if it's possible, we want to have someone to yoik for them, so that they once again become a part of the kind of cosmological and philosophical worldview, Sami worldview, that they, because they are a part of it. They are now in exile, but still they are a part of it.
We have one question, and I think it's a really nice question. And I think this is also like maybe directed a little bit towards the institutions, but the question goes so. This is Lisa Kalkowski asking, is there also plans for financially supporting or organizing exhibitions in the Sápmi itself? I noticed, for example, in Kilpisjärvi area, that there is very little to find. And I wonder if part of the repatriation would also be to give money for the people with the knowledge to work locally instead of getting the experts to Berlin or other places, and organize exhibitions there. So to also bring the research dialogue, everything back to the people that it belongs to, and move away from the colonizing gaze. I think it's a good question, yeah.
Well, in any case, it could be possible, of course. This could be part of the project process to get objects to Sápmi and do an exhibition there. This would be a very good idea.
Yes.
Well, I talked about the traveling exhibition. Okay, this is only an idea. It's not a plan. It's an idea. But we can do some small exhibitions. Why not, with our objects or with the objects located at MAC in Sápmi museums, of course.
Yes, we have now in the Sámi Museum started a kind of, or it's not a new thing, but we have been the museum has been reactivated in a way that we have two persons working in the museum and two Sámi women, and they have been on tourney through the Sámi area, and for example in Kilpisjärvi, not in Kilpisjärvi, in Hetta, and I think they were in Karesuando, they were in Utsjoki, and then they were in Sevettijärvi in Vuotso, and the idea was to show some old photos, but also they took some repatriated objects with them, and people had the possibility to see them. So that's really important, and I think that this question was really good, and that could be perhaps something that Elisabeth, you could think about arranging these small tourneys with local, having the local handicrafts people, or going with them, and maybe a person from the museum, and then having these possibilities to sit with the objects and discuss about them, and maybe why not small exhibitions? I mean, and definitely I agree. The museum, we should have a filial in Enontekiö area somewhere.
Yeah, this is a great idea. I'm really thankful for that. But we, of course, we're going to do this on our own. We have to have help and with our experts in Sápmi, and we are only a mediator. Well, we have got the objects, and we have to cooperate with Siida and other experts there, which know some people who are really eager to host such a small exhibition. Yeah. Great.
There is one more question or a comment. Antje Neumann, I think. Repatriation should be recognized as a process of decolonization. That's correct. The Sami as an indigenous people have an internationally recognized right to self-determination, which also compromises ownership of their historical remains, including Sami artifacts, but also archives. Repatriation is thus not only a political, legal process, but an expression of the recognition of the right of self-determination. What is the German position towards the recognition of the Sami rights to self-determination? Germany acceded to the ILO Convention 169, recognizing the social, cultural, religious, and spiritual values and practices of indigenous people, and will be bound to the convention as of 23rd of June 2022. Shouldn't there be a legal obligation to repatriate all Sami objects and archives?
Yeah. Well, I agree, but this is my personal opinion. I cannot decide whether we repatriate or not, because our museum is part of the Prussian Cultural Heritage Foundation, and this is financed by the state and by the federal states. And so we have a board, a foundation board, that decides whether we repatriate or not. So, but I'm of course your opinion, because Germany ratified the ILO convention, and then there must be the consequences, of course. But I think, well, this is still a way to go, but I think we're getting to it. I can't believe. Well, haven't you imagined that a few years ago that we will restitute the Benin bronzes? No.
Oh, no.
Huh? But wait and see. I'm very positive.
We are running out of time. I hate this part when I have to be like, okay, now we have to like put ourselves.
There's one good question still
yes,
there.
There is a fantastic question, and I apologize to the speakers, but also the audience, that we're going to run a little bit over time, but just because this question is very good, and I think that this is something that also Elisabeth, all of us here want to kind of discuss as well. So the question goes like this. You spoke of the dangers of databases on one hand, and the benefits of cooperation and artistic research on the other. I am interested in what are the dangers of cooperation with contemporary art? What do you have to consider and watch out for? And also, what does a cooperation with artists bring in your experience that offers fields cannot achieve? I think Finland, we have had a very bad example of contemporary art and non-collaboration, but appropriation. So I think this is also a good question.
Yes, I think that, I mean, I can only speak on my behalf. I mean, I have worked together with Sami artist Outi Pieski, and she is a Sami herself, reflecting her own culture. So that is kind of, it has made, we together we made more. She made me think out of the researcher's box, and I kind of, well, was the researcher, even though we did it together. And then we also took all the Sami women who wanted to discuss with us, and we all the time gave the information back to them. So I cannot say any bad words about our cooperation, but I totally agree that to work with Sami material, whether you are a researcher, whether you are a contemporary artist, you always have to remember that there's a lot to learn before you can do it if you are not a Sami yourself. So there is a thin line between being interested and appropriate. So I would say, for example, this twerking woman with the vinyl pants and wearing a Sami man's costume or this clothing.
Yeah.
And yes, grind that was bought to Kiasma. It's very offensive. And I mean, it's good to remember that, well, I think if you want to work with Sami culture, be in contact with the Sami people and ask for their permission before, and also take no as an answer if they answer no.
Yes, I would do really the same, because, well, at first we are not an art museum. So we seldom work or cooperate with artists. Sometimes, yes. If we have some colleagues like Eeva-Kristiina who worked with Outi Pieski, of course, no problem. But if their artists were demanding to get into our collection, to get inspired by Sami objects, I would refuse it. I simply would refuse it. I would never loan an object to other exhibitions or art exhibitions without having asked our colleagues in Sámi, of course. We would never present the Shaman Drums, never. We always, because we don't know how to work. We have to ask for permission, of course.
Yes, thank you so much. Mikko, do you have any last words that you would, I think that as a Finnish Institute, what can you do to not have any issues happening with this one or anything?
I'm lucky that we are over time, so my last
I don't have to say anything.
Yes. Thank you, and that we want and will stay involved in making these relations, helping there if possible. I got very interested about this idea of bringing a small exhibition to Finland and to talk to other museums and other people who don't know enough about this stuff. That's something we want to do. And we have a focus of the Sami theme for the next year. So that's what I can say. And I really thank you. It was super interesting. And I'm really happy to be able to host it in a way and to make it possible and be part of it.
Yes. Thank you for everyone who came to see, and thank you so much for our professionals.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It was great.
Yes.
And by the way, the question about the modern art and stuff is made by the Kindle Museum itself in Berlin.
Yes.
So if you want, you can go there and have a look how it's handled.
Yes.
And we are part of that project as well, have side program, and we will have, for example, Suvi West's film here and stuff like that. So
Fantastic.
Wonderful.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mikko. Thank you, everyone. This has been the 5th episode of the In Conversations with the Finnish Institutes. You will be able to access this at some point from YouTube as well. So you will be able to share this, and we're going to upload this. Remember to go and check our previous sessions as well. There's 4 others, and hopefully I'll see you all soon, audience and discussants. And I wish you all a very nice evening, and thank you again for coming and joining and asking so very good questions tonight and engaging. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kiitos. Hei hei.
Kiitos.
Ruokaa sinne.
Kiitos. Kiitos. Hei hei.
Hey, hey. Thanks, Monica.
No problem.
Yeah.
Thank you.